program is brought to you by Agnes Scott College. For more information about Agnes Scott College, please visit our website at agnesscott.edu.
Lerita Coleman Brown. She's a professor here of psychology and interim chair of the psychology department at Agnes Scott College. She served as associate dean of the college from 2000 to 2004 and was recently named director of the GEMS, which stands for Generating Excellence in Science and Math. A quick background. I recently met Dr. Coleman Brown this past January at the sophomore retreat in Jekyll Island. She normally works with upperclassmen, seniors, but she likes to volunteer every year at this retreat for sophomores. This year for sophomores is very important. Obviously everyone is here for our special weekend and the ring ceremony. And the retreat is kind of for us to step back and rethink our majors, rethink what we really want to do, and along with Dr. Lerita Coleman Brown and other professors, they serve as mentors, and she actually served as my small group leader at the retreat. So it's a really big retreat for everybody, and she loves doing it. Prior to working at Agnes Scott College, she taught at the University of Michigan, Tennessee, and Colorado. She was selected as a fellow of the Advanced Study of Behavioral Sciences in Palo Alto, California, the 1984 to 1985 academic year. Dr. Brown was born in Pasadena, California, and later majored in psychology as an undergraduate of the University of California, Santa Cruz, and received her PhD in social psychology from Harvard University. Her early research centered in nonverbal communication, but she's published over 30 articles and one edited volume on topics ranging from women, work, and aging to stigma, identity, and self-concept. Recently, she published an essay entitled Advising a Diverse Student Body, Lessons I've Learned from Trading Places, in the journal Liberal Education. In addition to her academic work, Dr. Brown leads a weekly Friends of Silence group comprised of faculty and staff. Trained at the Shalem Institute of Spiritual Formation, Dr. Brown also serves as a regular spiritual director companion to several individuals in the Atlanta metro area. She's also a member of the Spiritual Directors International and Atlanta Metro Spiritual Directors, and at the sophomore retreat, led a kind of silent meditation for students. So Dr. Brown now lives in Stone Mountain with her husband, and they have 2 grown children who reside in Dallas, Texas, and Incheon, South Korea. She enjoys reading, sewing, writing, watching college football, gardening, visual and performing arts, telling stories, and laughing a lot. If y'all will all give a warm welcome to Dr. Lerita Coleman Brown, along with turning off your cell phones. And at the end of the program, there's a donation box at the back for the class of 2011. Thank you, and please give a warm welcome to Dr. Lerita.
Thank you so much, Kelly. That was fabulous. I am just so delighted to be here, and I first want to thank the class of 2011 for inviting me to talk today. It is such an honor. As a matter of fact, I told some of them when I got the email initially that I felt like I just won an Academy Award. Maybe I've been watching too many award shows, but I was just really excited and delighted to be here this afternoon. So thank you to the class of 2011, not only for this honor, but also for sponsoring this lecture series. I just think that it's a great idea to have us to kind of reflect on what would be our last lecture, we were giving one. And so I'm just really happy that you invited me to do this. I also want to thank a few other people before I get started. I would like to thank Coleman Brown from ITS for his help with workable PowerPoint, to Emily Gwynn, as well as Tammy Stanko for setting things up here today. Ed Woods, who just really hooked me up with this great microphone, so I can walk around. To Demetrius Williams, who helped with some of the events planning this weekend. And also to my darling husband, who supplied many of the photos that we will see today, or at least took some pictures of even some older ones, and who has put up with me for the last 2 weeks as I got crazier and crazier before this day, before we got to this day. And I also want to thank all of my family and friends who have actually walked this journey with me. Some of you obviously are here today, but there are also many who will be able to watch this on, I hear, iTunes U, which I think is a fabulous thing. So my family in California will actually be able to see this lecture at some point. And I am just delighted that some of them are here, but also that that they have actually given me their love and support all these years, and I really appreciate it more than you will ever know. So let's get started here. Now, the title of my talk today is From the Edge of Death to All the Way Live and Back Again, my last lecture, and as I go along, I'll give you some indication about why I chose that title. As I was preparing for this lecture, I thought it might be important to reflect on, well, are there any benefits? Because, you know, when someone says they want you to give a last lecture, it's kind of scary, actually. And I thought, well, there might be some benefits to this. And one of them was that I could share personal, but maybe not usually public information. So you'll probably learn a lot more about me than I normally would share with a public audience. But my students the other day actually Googled me as part of a presentation in class, and I now know there's much more out there than I ever want to know on the internet. I also realized that I don't have to worry about what people think. So if this is my last lecture, who cares? I can say whatever I want. And then, you know, it gives me an opportunity to discuss some great things that have happened, some not so great things, and the really ugly, which there's some of all of that. I also wanted to mention a few things about my history with lecturing. My first lecture actually was when I was a sophomore in college. And I know this probably sounds pretty incredible, but one of the things I'll be talking about today is about being bold. And so I was in an intro to sociology class, and I thought the professor really wasn't covering all of the subjects, at least to my satisfaction, and in the depth at least. And so I said to him, I went to him and I said, you know, it'd be nice if we could talk a little bit more about this. And he said, well, why don't you do a lecture? Now, granted, this was early 70s, and you know things were a little radical then, as you'll see even more. And so I said, okay. So I did my first lecture as a sophomore, which I think is kind of ironic that I'm addressing the sophomore class. So just keep that in mind. And I actually started lecturing in my first class, and my first class was when I was a college senior. Again, I went to UC Santa Cruz in a very radical time. We were on pass no credit, so I had an opportunity to take 2 graduate courses and to teach my own course. And along with my advisor, I petitioned the academic senate, and so they allowed me to teach a student-directed seminar called Psychology of Advertising and Consumer Behavior. Now, of course, this would never happen these days because our accrediting agency would not ever allow a college student to teach other college students. But at the time, they allowed us to do it, and so that's when I started the first lecture. And then the other thing is that as a faculty associate in the Teaching Excellence Program at University of Colorado, I went around to observe professors lecturing and teaching. And I learned a lot of things about giving lectures during that time. And one of the things that I learned is that oftentimes professors try to cover too many topics in one lecture. So for example, I was sitting in the back of a history class one day, and this professor tried to cover 10 different topics in this one lecture. And of course, most of the students were in the back going, so just to make sure that you don't all go to sleep today, I'm not going to try to cover everything in this lecture. As a matter of fact, I just want to focus on 4 themes, and those are: see all circumstances as opportunities, boldly utilize all of your resources, live purposefully, and cherish silence, stillness, and solitude. So those are the 4 things that I'm going to focus on today. So now, I'm first going to tell you a story about my journey and about seizing opportunities. Obviously, you've gotten a little taste of that so far. I mean, I boldly give a lecture in my sophomore year, and I teach a class so those were very bold things. But they were opportunities that were available because I went to a very unusual school, and I think it's really important for us to seize those opportunities. But as I tell you the story of my journey, and usually when I share this story, most people say, you're lying. But it's really all true. Everything I'm going to tell you today is absolutely true. So, this is where we begin. I have this picture of myself when I was about 8 or 9 months old. And during a routine visit to the pediatrician, the doctors told my parents that I had a heartburn. So they referred me to a cardiologist, and he confirmed that. And so they weren't quite sure what I had, but they basically said, okay, so she has a heartburn. So, and as I went along through childhood, they monitored it, and occasionally from time to time I would have an enlarged heart. And so when I was about, maybe just a little bit older than this, about 11 years old, I had my first heart catheterization. And my first heart catheterization was pretty traumatic for a number of reasons. One of them was that here I was, a little black girl, living in my little black family in a little black neighborhood. And I go off to this hospital, and I don't know if the hospitals at that time were very sterile. So everything was white. The walls were white, the sheets were white, the doctors were white, the nurses were white, and even the uniforms. I mean, the nurses wore white uniforms with white hats, and they even wore white stockings and white shoes. So it was a really scary thing for me to sort of be taken out of my neighborhood there. Besides the fact that if any of you are familiar with heart catheterizations, they actually inject you with a dye that warms up the body. And so this was fairly traumatic for me as a 11-year-old. But nonetheless, they still didn't know what my problem was, despite the fact that they did this heart catheterization. So when I was about 21 years old, now I know you're expecting to see me at 21, but surprise! Now, this is actually a picture of my grandfather, William Frank Bland. And William Frank Bland actually gave me 2 gifts, among many others. One of them was that, and I think he's probably in his early 60s here, he doesn't have a lot of gray hair, and neither do I. I have absolutely no gray. I have like 3 gray strands. They come and go, but I don't have to use hair dye or anything. So one of his gifts, wonderful one, was no gray. But the other one was that there is this heart condition, genetic disorder that runs in the family, and it's called, and at about 21 years old, they were actually able to diagnose this. It's called idiopathic hypertrophic subaortic stenosis. Now, if you sort of dissect the meaning of this, idiopathic meaning they don't know where it's coming from, and stenosis, they don't know where it's going, they didn't know what the hell I had. I did have some kind of disease. So I noticed that I was having a few problems as an undergraduate at Santa Cruz with some of the hills. And I was a little concerned about going off to the East Coast with snow and everything for graduate school. But I did actually have a team of doctors at Stanford, sort of look me over and they said, look, people all over the world have heart conditions. And I don't think you're really going to have a problem, but just don't be out there shoveling snow. But I think you'll be fine. So go ahead on to graduate school. So I did just that. And I spent, my time there. I actually I did very fine until perhaps my last year, my fourth year. And I started to really have a lot of heart symptoms. Shortness of breath, chest pain that went through my arm. And so I was beginning to get very concerned about that. And at the time, by the way, I happened to be dating a guy who was a medical resident in internal medicine. And so we were talking one day, and he says, I have something for you. And he brings me a file. He had been collecting articles on IHSS, which is the abbreviation for idiopathic hypertrophic stenosis. And so he had a file, which will be probably one of many coincidences that happen, but or sometimes people call them synchronicities. But so this guy has this file, and he says, I think you should read this. So I read through the file and all the latest articles, journal articles on IHSS. And then he referred me to one of the top doctors at Mass General Hospital. And so I went to the doctor and we talked a bit, and he said, I think what we're going to have to do is a myomectomy, which is basically where they go in and they carve out a bit of heart tissue just to kind of relieve the pressure in my heart. So, and he was trying to decide whether to send me to NIH or to do it at Mass General, but he kept me there. I had the surgery, and then in the follow-up, I said to him, well, I've got this conference I'm going to go to in London in a few weeks. What do you think? So he looked at me like I was absolutely crazy. And then he said, well, okay, just don't drink a lot of tea, and here's some names of doctors just in case. So I went off to London, and I was okay. And so when I came back from that trip, I walked in back to school, and people started looking at me like I was a ghost. And I said, why are you guys looking at me like I'm, And they said, well, we heard that you had open heart surgery and that you weren't coming back to the program, and that, we had wasted all this money, and and I said, no, I'm back, and I plan to graduate with a job in June. So that's exactly what happened. And so I finished there, and I'm going to fast forward this story a little bit, about 13 years. And I'm living in lovely Boulder, Colorado, and teaching at the University of Colorado. So I must admit that it took a little effort on my part to get prepared to move to the higher altitude. I had to do a lot of exercising. It took about 6 months for me to adjust. It was quite a challenge for me, but I made it. And so it's about 1993, and I noticed that I'm just not feeling as peppy, just don't have the kind of energy that I want to have. So I go in for my regular visit to the cardiologist, and I mentioned that to him. So he does an echocardiogram, and as he's standing there looking at it, he says, oh, well, looks like your IHSS has turned into a full-blown cardiomyopathy. I guess you'll be looking at a transplant in about the next 3 years. And then he walks out of the room. So much for bedside manner. I must admit, I almost fell off the table, and the woman who was there, who had been doing the echocardiogram, kind of helped me to my car. I went home, and I was just hysterical. I probably cried for a day in my house. And I tried to deny that this was actually happening. I just said, well, I'll go get a second opinion, which of course, you can always get a second opinion. And I got one doctor said, well, things don't look that bad. I think you're okay, But I continued to have, periods of shortness of breath. And so I went to an acupuncturist, hoping that maybe if they just put a pin in the right place, I could just get rid of this altogether. But apparently, that was not to be. And he said to me one day, the acupuncturist said to me, he says, look, Lerita, you're sitting on a genetic time bomb. And it's just a matter of time. And what I'm going to do is to try to give you the energy so that you can prepare yourself psychologically and physically for the path that you're about to walk on, because I think you're headed for a transplant. So I tried to stay in denial until about August of 1994. I was actually at home meeting California, attending an American Psychological Association convention. And that's important, just remember that. Colorado and find myself in a full-blown heart failure incident. Really short of breath, totally exhausted, and not feeling well at all. So I went back to the cardiologist and they said, you know what? We think it's time for you to consider going to University Hospital and possibly having a heart transplant. So I said, okay. I actually did that and had a wonderful team of people that were working me up. And in particular, this doctor here on the woman in the front here on the, I guess that's your left, Dr. Joy Lindenfeld was actually my primary transplant cardiologist. She was absolutely wonderful, a person to work with. And I was very ambivalent about having a heart transplant. I didn't, just think about it. Someone's going to take out your heart, put it in somebody else's. It's just like, oh, no. So, I spent a lot of time being concerned about that. And so she said to me, I said, I'm not sure if I want to do this. And she said, you know what? That's absolutely fine. She said, but let me tell you this. She said, you're an excellent candidate for a transplant. You're young, there's nothing else wrong with you. She said, I just think you would be a great person, you'd do very well. And so I said, well, okay. She said, but you know what, if you don't want to do this, it's absolutely fine. Just let me tell you that you have about 18 months. And and the end is really not pretty. It's like, you're going to have more and more heart failure, you're going to be more tired, and you're going to end up in the hospital on a trip. And it's just not going to be a happy time. So I really think you ought to think about this. So I said, okay, I'll think about it. So then I was actually in the hospital in November. I just like these little schemes. I was in the hospital in November, and I was in because I normally could keep myself out of heart failure by taking diuretics. That's what they give people to drain off the fluids so you don't have to be in heart failure, which is basically when you just have too many fluids in your body and your heart is just not pumping strong enough to pump them all through. And I should mention that when I went in to see the transplant team, they measure how strong your heart is pumping with a number called the ejection fraction. So typically a person ejection fraction is about 55%. Well, mine was about 30 at that point. And when you get to 30, they start to give you Coumadin and other blood thinners so you won't throw a clot. And I should mention, by the way, before I had my transplant, it had gotten down to 15. And I'm still walking, believe it or not. But I'm in the hospital one weekend in November, and so Dr. Lindenfeld comes in and says, well, so are you ready to be put on the list? Because once you go on the list for a transplant, you can be called anytime. So being the crazy academic that I am, I said, thinking to myself, it's not the end of the semester, I can't go on the list yet. I got to do finals, read my papers, no, I can't do that. So I said, I said to her, I'm waiting for a sign. She's like, okay. Like, this isn't fine enough. And the funny thing is that I went back to work that following Tuesday to teach my class, and one of my colleagues knocks on the door, and I said, come in. He says, what are you doing here? I said, what do you mean, what am I doing here? He said, you know what, the word is out in the street. I said, what? He said, you're in the hospital waiting for a heart and oxygen. I said, well, apparently that's not true. I said, I need to go teach this class, so I'll talk to you later. So, about 3 weeks after this conversation with Dr. Lindenfeld, I get a phone call from a gentleman who's a minister in Colorado Springs. And he says to me, he wanted to ask me some questions about some research I was doing. And then he said, well, how's life? And I said, oh. And I go through this whole thing about having to have a heart transplant. And he says, I've got this member of my congregation, Brother Dewberry. He had a heart transplant about 3 years ago. I'm going to have him call you. And the most amazing thing was Brother Dewberry was one of 3 African Americans in the state of Colorado who have ever had a heart transplant. And turns out probably going to be number 4. But he calls me up and says, you know what, this was a healing experience for him, and I think you ought to do it, and you'll have a wonderful one. So in January of 1995, in January of 1995, and by the way, this is a picture of one of my dear friends, Meta, from Colorado, and she's a placeholder for my donor. And because I have a picture of my donor, but on my mantle at home with other family pictures, but I'm very protective of her identity. But on January 9th of 1995, I had a heart transplant, and my daughter was a young woman. She was about 40 years old. She was very much worried about getting sick in her 40s. And about 2 days after her 40th birthday, she had brain aneurysm. And she was in and out of consciousness for about 3 or 4 days, and then she had a major stroke that she was going to come back from. And so her family decided to donate her heart, 2 kidneys, a liver, and I think some cornea. And I actually was recovering with all the rest of those recipients on a floor in Colorado. So I had a heart transplant, and it was fine, but a bit rocky. And then, a few years later, I met this guy. And then, this happened. A few years later. Now, I have this Bible struck by lightning because, they say that any woman over the age of 40, the likelihood that she's going to get married is like getting struck by lightning twice. And if you had a heart transplant, I think 5 times. So I actually got married, and, they lived happy ever after. Right. Okay. If you believe that, I got some prime stock. Okay. So, because, and the story of how I met my husband is a totally another lecture, but I'm living in Colorado, he's living in Atlanta, we meet in Washington, D.C., because I happen to know his brother, it's one of those kind of things. But I moved to Atlanta in 1999 after getting married, and wasn't sure what I was going to do. I just took a leave from Colorado, and I figured if I found a job I liked, I'd stay here. So I applied to one job in the year 2000. It was this one. And when they called me for a campus interview, I was actually in the hospital, believe it or not. But I was offered a job, and I came here as the associate dean of the college in 2000, and stayed in that role for some time. Then, 2003, I refer to as the season of death. Then, between Columbus and I, we probably lost about 20 people in the year 2000. And they actually started in December when one of the women, there were 3 women who were over the age of 60 who promised my parents that they would take me to the hospital when I was called for a heart transplant. And by the way, let me just backtrack for a second and say that I was on the list for 4 days. Unbelievable, it never happens, but for whatever reason. And I'll sort of come back to that later, but just surprised in the middle of the night. And the night that I was called, I was very tired, and I turned off my phone, and you're never supposed to do that once you're on the list. But I did it anyway, because I figured, they're not gonna, I just got this beeper, they're not gonna call me, so I don't have to worry about that. And as I got into bed, this little voice said, "Where's your beeper?" And I just ignored it, I was like, I'm too tired. And I heard it again. It came back really loud, "Where's your beeper?" So I got up, and I found my purse was downstairs somewhere, and I got up the stairs and threw it on the floor and went back to sleep. And in the middle of the night, it went off. And what I said, I can't really share in public because I couldn't believe that I thought I was dreaming, but it actually was real. And so there were 3 ladies who came to pick me up and take me to the hospital. We call them the Boulder Mothers. And one of them actually died in December of 2002. And then we lost one of our assistant deans, Sharon Smith, here in 2003, dear sweet colleague. And then in March, my father died, and it was just rolling deaths. It was terrible. But I find myself in October in the hospital at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, having a serious rejection episode. And actually, it was probably the first time I ever thought I was really going to die. I imagined my memorial service, and people come to the house afterwards. It was really bad. I actually started calling people to tell them goodbye, and my dear husband called my sister and said, "I think you need to get down here because it's not looking good." But one of the things that one of the medications that they gave me to try to save my heart was called OKT3, which my sister nicknamed OKTKO. Because, okay, this is going to knock you out. And it makes you feel horrible. It's a 10-day course of it. And I can even become like a Pavlovian dog. You know it was coming, and it's like, you knew you were going to be sick for the evening. It's one of those kind of things that if you're not dying, it makes you feel like it might be a better choice. It was really bad. So I'm in the hospital, and they say to me, well, Ms. Brown, they come in one day and say, Ms. Brown, we think we're going to be able to save your heart, but we're probably going to have to kill your kidneys to do it. And I'm like, no, I'm just totally, in denial about that. But, oh wait, I have to say one thing. I forgot. While I was in the hospital having this horrible rejection episode, I got this beautiful card from Professor Richard here. And people don't realize how much cards mean to people that are ill, which is why I send them all the time. I mean, when I had my heart transplant, I think I had over 250 cards in my house, and each one was like a little light of energy. But I got this card from Professor Richard Perry, and he wrote just a note in it saying, I've been meaning to write you, and I just want to send you this crocus, which is really, the first sign of hope for spring. And I've never forgotten it because it was that turnaround moment where I started really thinking about, I had forgotten about hope, and that I should really have some hope that I was going to recover. And then I started getting all these cards that basically were about hope. So it was really the turnaround for me. I could actually feel myself physically start to recover. But 6 months later, I was in renal failure and had to go on dialysis. I took a leave from Agnes Scott, and let me just say, my heart goes out to anybody on dialysis, anybody who has to even think about dialysis. It is not a happy life. And they have a very restricted diet. You feel like you're malnourished most of the time, and you're very tired. And I used to refer to it as my part-time job that I couldn't take a vacation from, because you always had to have it. I even went to Hawaii for my brother's wedding, and I was sitting up there with, and mostly men, older men, Japanese men having dialysis. So it's really not a happy thing. But in 2005, I had a kidney transplant, and Dr. Depree and Director of International Education, donated me one of her kidneys. The amazing part of this story is that the Agnes Scott community is amazing because I didn't really ask anybody for a kidney. I talked it over with some of my siblings, but because this genetic condition runs in the family and that any of them could develop it at any time, I knew they were going to need their kidneys. And so, but there were 14 people who volunteered to be tested. 9 of them were from Agnes Scott. And of that 9, 5 of them tested, we matched on blood type, and 3 of them were matches on what they call the HLA, DNA genetic testing. And of course, my donor was Jennifer Lunches. So I recovered from that. And you might say, well, this is the end of the story. Not really. So in 2006, after having this kidney transplant in 2005, I went to the doctors one day and I said, I still seem to be having a little fluid retention in my legs, which is something that's very common for kidney problems. I said, I don't understand it. They said, well, maybe we need to fix that little valve of yours that's been leaking. I said, little valve? And they said, well, because you've had so much rejection, we've kind of worn out your tricuspid valve, so we probably need to replace it. So I said, well, so how do we know that it's time to replace it? They said, well, sort of when you can't kind of take it anymore. I said, well, do we have some more objective criteria? And so they said, well, sometimes the fluid is backing up in your liver, we might want to do that. So I said, okay, well, let's have that test. So they did the test, and about a week later they called me and said, we're scheduling you for surgery. So in March of 2006, I had a valve replaced on my transplanted heart. But they ran into this little problem, which is that when they went to fix the tricuspid valve, they damaged this section of the heart called the bundle of His, which controls the electrical circuiting of the heart. And so then I had what they call heart block, and they couldn't get my heart started back again. So a typical 3.5-hour operation ended up being 7 hours. My poor husband and sister were out there sweating bullets, and so was the surgeon. But they were able to get a pacemaker in, and so now I have a pacemaker. So why am I talking about all this? Well, you know, after going through all of this adversity, one of the things I had to sit with many times, and particularly many times in the middle of the night in the hospital, was, why am I still here? What am I supposed to be doing? And so it has become a repetitive question for me. When I'm sort of thinking about doing something, I will ask the question, what's the purpose of this? Why am I doing this? And what is my intention? And I want to pose a very similar question to all of you who are out here, which is, where is life inviting you? What are you here to do? Because I think you're never too old to begin to live the answers to these questions. I really do believe that we're all here for a reason, but oftentimes we're not in touch with that. But I think it's really vital to whether or not we're going to have a life of contentment. So, again on this theme, I have another story. I refer to it as the ego detour. So when I came out of high school, I really wanted to be either a fashion designer or a guidance counselor. High school guidance counselor. Those are my two possibilities. And so I went off to college, and I kind of got seduced by the academy, and I thought, well, you know, maybe I'll be a professor instead. So, you know, as you can see, I had this very successful academic life. I went to Harvard. I started teaching at the University of Michigan. I taught at the University of Tennessee, taught at the University of Colorado. Sometime in there, I got invited to the Center for Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences. And so I was really at the top of my profession in many ways. But I wasn't happy. And that was really important. I wasn't happy. And as I sometimes talk to the sophomores about this year, I have lost touch with my heart, which I think is really important for us to consider. So, one of the things I embarked on was trying to get a better understanding of what makes my heart sing. I should love this animation. Get excited every time I see it. So, what are some of those things? Here's my short list. Beautiful sunsets. I just loved beautiful sunsets. And I saw beautiful ones in Colorado, but I see them here in Georgia. Just give me a good sunset. Tulips. Did you notice the tulips in the beginning? I can't pass the basic tulips without just getting excited. Tulip. Popcorn. I love popcorn. And I love to pop it in my Whirly Pop, organic, of course. College football. It's on my list. You know, I'm really, in the fall, you know, when people call me on Saturday, I say, are you calling to bring me something to eat? Because I'm watching college football. I actually get excited about that. Oops, I should have done that. Anyway, I get excited in August because I know that it's like a month and it's going to be college football again. I also love beautiful fabric. You know, that fashion designer still lives in me. And so I love beautiful fabric. A green apple and a good book. It's got to be green, but green apple and a good book. And a cup of tea. People that know me know I collect teapots, and I love a good cup of tea. Now, what's important is not only to know what's on your short list, but to be able to share those with other people, particularly if you're in a relationship with them, and to know what's on their short list. So now we're going to find out what's on Columbus's short list. Fishing. More fishing. Art. My brownies, not just any brownies. And mine have nuts in them. We can find a really good picture of that. A background. And he likes tea too, but once you pick oolong, he's very specific. This is a very expensive tea, by the way. It's like $12 an ounce. But I found him some last week for Valentine's Day. Now, why this is important is because I think that, particularly for couples, that doing things that make your spouse or partner or whoever heart-sing is the glue that keeps relationships together. But most of the time, people don't even stop to think about what's on their list or what's on anybody else's list. But it is so important, and I leave this for you to ask yourselves, later, what makes your heart sing? And I think one of the reasons why this is so important to me is because one of the things I've learned is that pain and sorrow are always present in life. Since 2003, I've lost both of my parents. And so those things are going to come into life. There's going to be other stuff there. But you need some joy to balance it out. And it's in those things that make your heart sing that allow you to balance out that joy with that pain. So be sure to go home and make your list. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about today is silence, stillness, and solitude. How did I learn about my heart's desires? And I want to begin with one of my final stories, and this is about being in the Smoky Mountains. I'm a person who really cherishes silence and solitude and stillness, because I think when we stop, we begin to hear some things from the inside out that are important, like what makes your heart sing. But I got offered a job. I was at University of Tennessee, and I was sort of happy, but not particularly happy in that psych department there. And I got offered a job at Swarthmore College. Now, Swarthmore College was actually on my short list of places to possibly teach. It just has an excellent liberal arts program, very smart students. And so I got offered this job, but I wasn't sure if I should take it. So I drove up to the Smoky Mountains, which were at the time about 35 minutes outside of Knoxville, and I found a rock, and I sat on it. And I decided that I was going to sit there and be quiet until I heard an answer. And what I heard was no. And I'm like thinking, no, I can't believe I should turn down this job. But the answer was no. So I turned down the job. And about 6 months later, I got offered a job at the University of Colorado Boulder, excuse me, and for actually half the classes and 1.5 times the money, but that's another story. That's not the most important part of the story. And so when I was prepping for the transplant, I was talking to a surgeon just about the whole process and everything. He said, you're very fortunate. I said, why is that? He said, well, because if you were living on the East Coast, you might not make it. I said, really? He said, well, there are a lot of centers vying for the same organs, but out here in the West, we're sort of out in the wide open space, and there are just not as many transplant centers. And the heart can only stay out of the body 4 to 6 hours. So by being in the state of Colorado, you're much more likely to get a heart and to get it faster. So that decision that I made in the quiet, 5 years previous, or 7 years, or whatever time it was, had major impact on a life-threatening situation many years later. And that's why I try to encourage my students when they're trying to make decisions about things to be quiet and to try to listen. Do your homework, gather all your information, but to be quiet. And interestingly, I found out that they actually had guesstimated the time for me for my heart transplant would be 6 to 8 weeks, which is also unheard of. But because I lived in the state of Colorado, which had a very high donor rate, a lot of accidents, people skiing, whatever, because I was petite and my blood type was A positive, and for whatever weird reason, more A positive types become available, I was likely to get this heart. And because I'm petite, I can take hearts that some big men couldn't take. There's a lot of men with O blood type on the list, tons of them. So obviously they had to wait longer. So that one decision that I made up there in the quiet of that mountains, perhaps made me determine whether or not I was going to live 7 years later. So I tried to cherish silence. I tried to have some silent time every day, in the morning and the evening. And I tried to listen. I call it listening and hearing from the inside out. But what is my problem? Frequently, I refuse to stop and listen, or I often refuse to follow the guidance I get. So for example, some of the things that I'm often told is, you're tired, go to bed. But I'm still at the computer doing stuff. Or you really shouldn't bring up that topic right now. Or don't send an email, but you know, a lot of times we get this information, you just totally ignore it. And it's linked to my guardian angel. I have named her Gertrude. She's my guardian angel of needless suffering. Because you know, we do a lot of needless suffering when we don't pay attention. And I find that the more I listen to her, the clearer the guidance is. And it's always timely, always. So, you know, everybody has a guardian angel, so you should just name yours. Grace, Grant, Gary, it doesn't matter. Now, I also cherish stillness. And last spring, I was able to take a trip to the Grand Canyon. And this was really a wonderful thing because for me to be at 7,000 feet, sort of with snow on the ground, was pretty amazing. And so I was delighted to be able to get back there because I love the Grand Canyon. There's something about the Grand Canyon. And I was trying to figure out what it was that always drew me to the, I mean, you can just say Grand Canyon and I get excited. And I think it's because, and I stood there, my toes almost froze to death, but I stood there until I could really get a sense of that. And it was because it's so still. The Grand Canyon is one of the stillest places I've ever been. And that stillness is about as gentle as my voice is right now. It's very calming. But the thing that I've noticed is that that stillness is everywhere. And I noticed that it was at home in the morning. You know, when you get up in the morning, particularly on Sunday morning, there's not a lot of people running around. The stillness is out there. Or, you know, the stillness is in the kitchen, or the stillness is in my office, or the stillness is out there on the quad. But it's everywhere. And it's a kind of energy that just, I think, holds everything together. But we rarely stop and actually notice. Even if you notice some clouds going across the sky, oftentimes there's stillness in it, or the birds soaring, the hawks or whatever. It's very still. So there's something about that stillness that is very calming, very peaceful. And when we stop, we actually get a sense of that same peacefulness and calmness. Or if you just still your mind from all that chattering, racing around all the time, you begin to feel some of that peace yourself. The other thing that I like to do is to go on retreat. And there's something about getting away, turning off the cell phone, turning off the computer, no television. You know, as a matter of fact, Coleman and I are getting ready to go on a silent retreat next weekend. But I try to make it one of my habits to go at least twice a year on retreat. To just get away, shut it down. Now, normally I sleep for the first 12 hours. Because oftentimes I don't realize how tired I am until I stop. But retreats are wonderful for just getting a pulse on your life. You know, I take my journal and I just enjoy the nature and just an opportunity. And that's why I've been so involved with the sophomore retreat. And I think it's such a good thing for students before they declare a major to just stop and get away and just kind of get a sense of, you know, hearing whatever they need to hear from the inside. So, pay attention. The Wizard of Oz is true. You already have on the red slippers. All you need to do is be silent in order to listen. By the way, silent and listen have exactly the same letters, they're just rearranged. Just keep that in mind. But if you think about the story of the Wizard of Oz, you know, here you've got Dorothy running around trying to figure out how to get back home, and she encounters all this adversity, and there's these crazy things going on, and she thinks the wizard has the answer, but he doesn't, and she picks up the 3 guys, by the way, on the way. And who's the wisest person in that story who gives her the best advice? It's Glinda, her guardian angel, also known as the Witch of the West. And what does Glinda tell her? Hey, quit running all that running around. Just stop and click your heels. You know, you'll be home. So I think if we will stop and listen, or stop and be silent and listen sometimes, we might actually get back to that home of contentment that we know is there, but that we really are in contact with. You know, that little place of peace and joy. So if I had another chance where if I had a chance for another lecture, but this is my last lecture, so I wouldn't have a chance. I certainly would talk a little bit about gratitude and gratefulness and things that I'm grateful for, like chirping birds and beautiful skies and beautiful nature out there. And that being still allows you to see all this beauty that's around us all the time. We just walk past it most of the time. I'd also talk about how wonderful and grateful that I am for having good friends and families, because as you know, I didn't get through any of this by myself. If it hadn't been for a community, even when I was, recovering from the time that I was in the hospital for rejection or from the transplant or even from the last heart surgery, people in the Agnes community brought us food. They brought us dinner every night. And that is community. We don't get through this without good friends and family. I'd also talk about forgiveness. And that, forgiveness for me is not this thing about condoning behavior or excusing things. It's really about letting go of the resentment or the bitterness or whatever it is that's eating you up, that's causing you the high blood pressure or whatever it is that you're experiencing. But I don't like to walk around with that negative energy. And although it's not something that happens overnight, but I work on it. And I have a list, by the way, because people annoy me all the time. So I work on this. So, to summarize, I always like to summarize, we want to remember to see all circumstances as opportunities, even the ones that seem like they're bad. I mean, I actually am thankful for having a heart transplant. It gave me an opportunity to make a change in heart, which I really sorely needed to do, and not just my physical one. Be bold, utilize all the resources at hand. I just say, if there's something out there that you want to do, get out there and do it. Got resources, up the yin yang, as I always tell my students. Live purposefully. Why are you here? Where is life inviting you? I really think that we're all, as I said, we're all here for a reason, and that we need to get in touch with that. And then, of course, cherish stillness, silence, and solitude. Slow down, treasure the present, and listen deeply. We tell students to think deeply, while mine is listen deeply. Maybe we can add that to the president. Maybe we can add that to the mission statement. Listen deeply. So now, I just want to say that if they were to come to me tonight and say, well, Dr. Brown, this is really your last lecture and you're not going to make it through tonight. And the sun is setting on my life, and I'm about to make that last journey across the ocean to wherever it is that we go when we leave this space. I know that I have lived every single moment, the good, the bad, and the ugly, that I can actually leave this life thinking that I have lived purposefully, that I have utilized all my opportunities and all my resources, and that I have been able to see the beauty around me, and to leave this life with some great peace and deep joy. And so that I hope that each and every one of you will, when it's your time, when the sun is setting on your life, you will be able to leave this life feeling like your life had made a difference, and that you have been able to enjoy as every little moment that you could. And I want to again thank the class of 2011 for this opportunity.
More than happy to answer them. So stick around if you'd like. Thank you so much.